I never thought my life would turn into something out of a bad movie. One accident. That's all it took to unravel everything I thought I knew. While I was in the hospital recovering, my wife was out betraying me. I didn't want to believe it, but the truth has a way of creeping in, no matter how much you fight it. Then came the DNA test, something I never questioned before. The results? They changed everything. My family, my identity, my entire world. And the worst part? I had no idea what to do next. What would you do if overnight your whole life turned into a lie? I never imagined a single accident would shatter my entire world. One moment I was behind the wheel, humming along to the radio. The next, I was waking up in a hospital bed, groggy, bruised, and with a cast on my leg. But the real pain had nothing to do with the crash. It came later, when I found out that while I was lying in that hospital, Mari, my wife, was betraying me. I didn't want to believe it. Maybe it was the painkillers messing with my head. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. But deep down, I already knew the truth. I tried to push the thought away, to focus on my recovery, but something gnawed at me, a feeling I couldn't shake. That's when I made the decision, the one that would change everything. A simple DNA test. Not because I suspected anything about my kids, but because I don't even know. Maybe I just needed certainty somewhere in my life. So I sent in the samples, barely thinking about it. Days passed. The results arrived. I opened the envelope, heart pounding. My son, Michael, was mine. Relief flooded through me. But there was another envelope, one I wasn't prepared for. My hands trembled as I opened the second set of results. Kerry, my little girl, my baby, the daughter I rocked to sleep, whose tiny hand used to wrap around my finger like she never wanted to let go. The paper in my hands told a different story. A story I wasn't part of. Kerry wasn't mine. My breath hitched, my chest tightened. This wasn't real. It had to be a mistake. Lab errors happened, right? I read the paper again and again. The words didn't change. My world blurred. I barely remember stumbling to my car. I sat there, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. My mind raced. Flashes of her first steps, her giggles, the way she'd light up when she saw me. All of it. What? A lie? My pulse roared in, my ears. The betrayal wasn't just about Mari anymore. It was about my family, about the life I thought I had. And the worst part? I still loved Kerry. That hadn't changed, but everything else had. I needed answers. I needed to know if this was real. I wasn't ready to face Mari yet, not until I had the full picture, so I did the only thing I could think of. I picked up my phone and called my lawyer. This wasn't just a mistake. This was something bigger, and I wasn't sure I was ready for what came next. I don't remember how long I sat in that car, gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing keeping me grounded. The world outside kept moving. People, walking, cars passing, but inside everything had stopped. The weight of the truth crushed me, pressing against my chest like a boulder I couldn't move. My daughter wasn't mine. Those words circled in my head. Relentless, merciless. I gasped for air, but it felt like I was drowning. Then it hit me all at once, a wave so strong it ripped through me. I broke. I sobbed. Loud, ugly, uncontrollable. It wasn't just tears, it was everything. Every bedtime story, every scraped knee I kissed better, every time she called me daddy. My body shook, my stomach twisted, and I clutched my chest because it felt like something inside me had been torn out. If someone had told me losing a limb felt like this, I would have believed them. I tried to pull myself together, deep breaths, logic. But my mind kept racing. If Kerry wasn't mine, then who? Was her father? How long had Mari been lying to me? Did she ever plan to tell me, or was I just some fool playing a role in a life that was never real? The betrayal burned deep, and I hated that even now, a part of me wanted to believe there was a mistake. A lab error, a mix-up, something, anything, because the alternative, it was unbearable. I glanced at my phone. My lawyer had texted back, telling me she'd go over the results, double-check everything. But I knew. In my gut, I already knew. And that was the worst part. There was no waking up from this. No way to undo it. The life I had, the family I built, it was already gone, and I had no idea what to do next. I wiped my face, staring at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't recognize myself. My eyes were bloodshot, my expression hollow. The old me, the man who believed in his marriage, his family, his wife, he was gone. And in his place was someone I didn't know yet. But I had no choice. I had to keep moving. Because the next step, it would change everything. I forced myself to drive home. Though I barely remember the trip, the whole world felt distant, like I was watching my life through a fogged-up window. As soon as I stepped inside, I collapsed onto the couch and stared at the DNA results again, my fingers gripping the paper so tightly it crumpled. My mind refused to accept it, but I knew what I had to do. I needed confirmation, real, undeniable proof. So I picked up my phone and called Nadia, my lawyer. She answered on the second ring, her voice sharp and professional, but as soon as she heard me, she softened. I wasn't making sense, rambling about the test, about Kerry, about Mari's betrayal. Nadia listened, then cut through my panic with one clear instruction: send me the results. Let's make sure there's no mistake. I clung to that small sliver of hope. Maybe, just maybe, the lab had screwed up. I emailed the documents, my hands shaking the entire time. The waiting was torture. Minutes stretched into hours, each second a reminder that my life was unraveling. I kept replaying the night I caught Mari, the sickening realization that something had been off for years. How long had she been lying? How many times had I overlooked the signs? My lawyer finally called back. We'll redo the test, she said. Labs make mistakes, but let's be sure. I wanted to believe her, but deep down, I knew. A second test wouldn't change anything. Still, I agreed. Another test, another week of waiting. But what was I waiting for? A confirmation that my worst nightmare was real, or some miracle that would make it all go away. I had no idea. I was just grasping at anything to keep myself from spiraling further. Because if this was true, if Kerry wasn't mine, then what was I supposed to do? Walk away? Keep pretending? The questions were endless, and I had no answers. I sat there, staring at my phone, debating my next move. I couldn't confront Mari yet, not until I had the full truth. But I wasn't sure how. Much more I could take. And the hardest part? I wasn't the only one who would be shattered by this. My family needed to know. And that meant making the hardest phone call of my life. I sat there for what felt like hours, my phone in my hands, staring at my parents' number on the screen. How do you even start a conversation like this? Hey, Mom, Dad, guess what? My wife cheated, and one of my kids isn't mine. It sounded ridiculous, impossible, but it was my reality. I took a deep breath, hit the call button, and braced myself. My mother answered, her voice warm, familiar. I almost lost it right then. For a second, I wanted to pretend everything was fine, talk about something, anything else, but I couldn't. My voice cracked as I told them what happened, starting from the accident, then the DNA test, then the truth about Kerry. Silence. Then my mum broke down, sobbing. My father didn't say a word at first, just heavy breathing, the kind that told me he was trying not to lose it. Then came the questions. Are you sure? Could there be a mistake? I told them about the second test, how we were double-checking, but I already knew. The damage was done. My father, usually the strongest man I knew, finally spoke, his voice shaking with anger. That woman! She destroyed everything. My mother kept crying, asking about the kids. Michael, she whispered. Michael is yours, right? The fear in her voice made my chest tighten. Yes, I assured her. Michael is mine. One small certainty in a sea of chaos. We cried together. No one knew what to say. No one prepares you for something like this. My mother kept repeating, I can't believe it, while my father muttered curses under his breath. The betrayal didn't just break me, it shattered my family too. They loved Kerry. They helped raise her, and now, just like me, they didn't know what that meant anymore. She's still our granddaughter, my mum finally said, but the doubt in her voice was impossible to miss. I hung up, exhausted, emotionally drained. But there was no time to process, because if my parents were this devastated, how would Kerry feel when she found out? And more importantly, was I even ready to tell her? I had imagined this moment 1,000 times. What I would say, how I would demand the truth, the way she would break down and beg for forgiveness. But when I finally stood in front of Mari, the woman I had loved, the mother of my children, all I felt was emptiness. She sat on the couch, arms crossed, like this was some minor argument, like she hadn't just detonated a bomb in our lives. No, I said, my voice colder than I expected. She blinked, tilting her head. No what? My stomach turned. She wasn't even going to admit it. I threw the DNA results on the table. Kerry, I said, my jaw clenched. She's not mine. A flicker of something, guilt, fear, flashed across her face, but it was gone just as fast. It doesn't change anything, she whispered. It doesn't change anything. My vision blurred with rage. It changes everything, I snapped. You lied. For years, you let me believe. I stopped myself before I lost control. My lawyer, Nadia, had warned me, keep calm. Don't let emotions take over. Mary sighed, rubbing her temples. I never meant to hurt you. That was it. That was her excuse. Like that erased the betrayal, the humiliation, the damage she had caused. Nadia stepped in then, her voice sharp. This conversation is about moving forward, she said. We're filing for divorce. Mari scoffed like the idea was absurd. You're really going to throw everything away over a mistake? A mistake. My hands clenched into fists. This wasn't a mistake, I said. It was a choice, and now I'm making mine. Mari stared at me for a long moment, like she was finally realizing she had lost control. But I was done trying to understand, done looking for explanations. The damage was irreversible. And as I walked out of that room, one thought echoed in my mind. This wasn't just the end of a marriage, it was the end of the life I thought I had. The house was too quiet, too still. Michael was asleep, curled up in his bed, unaware of how his world was crumbling around him. But Kerry wasn't here, and that silence was louder than any scream. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the framed picture on my nightstand. Kerry, no more than 3 years old, sitting on my shoulders, her tiny hands tangled in my hair, laughing like I was her whole world. My throat tightened. Was that real or just another lie? I hated myself for even thinking it, because no matter what the DNA test said, I had been her father. I was the one who rocked her to sleep, the one who cheered the loudest at her school plays, the one who held her hand on the first day of kindergarten. That didn't just disappear overnight. But now I didn't know where I stood. Did she deserve to know the truth? Would she even understand? And if she did, if she looked at me one day and said, "You're not my real dad," would I survive it? A part of me wanted to walk away, to shut out the pain before it could get worse. But then I thought of her little voice calling me daddy. How could I abandon her? She wasn't responsible for this mess. She was just a kid who still saw me as her father, even if biology said otherwise. But could I keep doing it? raising a child who wasn't mine, knowing every time I looked at her, I'd see the biggest betrayal of my life. My hands clenched. This wasn't her fault. I had to remind myself of that over and over. But the anger, the grief, the humiliation, they didn't just go away. And the worst part, I had no idea how to separate my love for Kerry from my hatred for Murray. Every hug, every "I love you, Daddy," felt like a knife twisting deeper. Was it possible to be a father without breaking myself in the process? I exhaled, staring at the ceiling, searching for answers that didn't exist. I needed help, guidance, something. Because if I made the wrong choice, the one person who would suffer the most was Kerry. And I couldn't live with that. But I also didn't know how to live with the truth. Sleep became a distant memory. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind played a cruel game of what if? What if I had never taken that DNA test? What if I had never found out? Would I have lived my whole life in blissful ignorance? The thought made me sick. The truth was unbearable, but the lie would have been worse. Still, knowing didn't make it easier. The weight of it all pressed down on me, suffocating, relentless. I was barely holding it together, and if I broke, Michael and Kerry would suffer for it. I knew I needed help. I just didn't want to admit it. Therapy felt like an admission of defeat, like I was too weak to handle my own life. But then I looked at my kids. Michael, confused and worried because Dad wasn't acting like himself, and Kerry, completely unaware of the storm raging around her. I couldn't fall apart, not for them. So I made the call. A therapist recommended by Nadia, someone who specialized in trauma. Funny. A few months ago, I never would have considered my life traumatic. Now, I wasn't sure if I'd ever feel normal again. The first session was brutal. I sat there, arms crossed, jaw tight, listening as she asked me to open up. Where do you even start with something like this? I talked about the accident, then the test, then the moment I realized my whole life was built on lies. My voice shook, but I kept going. The anger, the sadness, the unbearable guilt that I couldn't just look at Kerry the same way. She listened, nodded, asked questions that made my chest tighten. Then she said something I wasn't ready for. You're grieving, like someone had died. At first, I wanted to argue, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. My marriage had died. The life I thought I had, gone. And Kerry, no, she wasn't dead, but the way I saw myself in her life, that was gone too. And if I didn't process that, it would eat me alive. So I kept going back. One session after another, peeling back layers I didn't even know existed. I didn't have all the answers yet. Hell, I wasn't even close. But at least now, I wasn't drowning alone. And for the first time in weeks, that gave me the smallest flicker of hope. Because the road ahead, it was still dark, still painful. But maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't be walking it alone. Moving forward sounded simple. In reality, it was like learning to walk again after a wreck. Painful, awkward, and exhausting. Every morning I woke up expecting to feel normal, only to be hit by the same crushing realization. My life wasn't the same. I wasn't the same. But I had 2 kids who needed me, so I forced myself out of bed, into a routine, into something that resembled stability. Fake it till you make it, right? Michael was my anchor. He was too young to understand everything, but he knew enough to sense that something had changed. He clung to me more, asking if I was okay, if we were still a family. Always, I told him, even when I wasn't sure what that meant anymore. Kerry, on the other hand, was still her usual self, bright, full of energy, completely unaware of the storm raging around her. I envied that innocence, and I dreaded the day it would shatter. I leaned on Nadia more than I expected. She wasn't just my lawyer. She became one of the few people who truly understood what I was going through. She checked in often, made sure I wasn't spiraling, reminded me that rebuilding took time. One step at a time, she'd say. I hated that phrase. I wanted everything fixed now, but life didn't work that way. So I focused on what I could control: work, therapy, being a father, keeping my distance from Mari. Because no matter how much she tried to talk, to explain, I had nothing left to say. People always talk about closure like it's some magical moment where everything makes sense and you can finally move on. But there was no closure here. Just a slow process of learning to live with the damage. Some nights I lay awake wondering if I'd ever trust anyone again, if I'd ever let my guard down, if I'd ever stop feeling like a fool. Those were the hardest nights, the ones where the anger crept in, whispering that I'd never really heal. But every morning I got up anyway, not because I had all the answers, not because the pain was gone, but because I refused to let this be the end of my story. Because Michael and Kerry needed a father who showed up. And because, deep down, I still believed there was a version of me out there, the one before all of this, who was worth finding again. Filing for divorce was easy. Emotionally, it was like ripping off a bandage that had fused to my skin. There was no clean break, just layers of pain peeling away, raw and exposed. Nadia handled most of it, keeping me updated on the legal side, but every document, every meeting, every discussion about custody felt like another reminder of how much Mari had destroyed. She had lied, broken our family, and now she was going to face the consequences. She fought, of course. She tried to paint me as the one overreacting, the one throwing everything away over one mistake. But the courts didn't see it that way. Infidelity was one thing. Raising a child that wasn't mine under false pretenses, that was something else entirely. And when the financial implications hit her, the reality of what she'd done finally started to sink in. No more joint accounts, no more shared assets. She wasn't just losing me, she was losing the life we had built together. Custody was the hardest battle. Michael was mine, no debate there, but Kerry, legally I had rights. I had raised her, loved her, but could I keep being her father? That question haunted me. Nadia pushed for a fair agreement, ensuring that whatever happened, Kerry wouldn't be left in the middle of our war. And yet the court's decision felt like another wound, one I wasn't sure would ever fully heal. Mari struggled. She wasn't prepared for life without me, without the stability I had provided. She called, texted, begged for conversations that I refused to have. She had made her choices, and now she had to live with them. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction in watching her world crumble the way mine had, but mostly I just felt empty. No amount of legal wins could undo the damage. The papers were signed. The marriage was over. And yet, even with all the official endings, there were still loose ends, unanswered questions, unresolved emotions. Because divorcing Mari didn't erase the past. It didn't take away the years we had. And it didn't change the fact that, in some twisted way, she would always be part of my life, whether I liked it or not. The day the divorce was finalized, I expected to feel relief, freedom, something. Instead, I just felt exhausted. Like I had spent months fighting a war only to realize I had no idea what came next. There was no celebration, no sense of victory, just paperwork and a quiet understanding that this chapter of my life was officially closed. But the damage, that would take longer to heal. Michael kept me grounded. Every time I looked at him, I saw a reason to keep pushing forward. He was innocent in all of this, and I refused to let my pain become his burden. Kerry, though, that was more complicated. She still looked at me like I was her dad, and in my heart, I still was. But every time I held her, there was a ghost between us. The truth lingering, waiting for the day she'd finally ask the question I dreaded. Would she hate me for not being her biological father? Or worse, would she stop seeing me as her father at all? Therapy helped. It didn't fix everything, but it gave me a place to untangle the mess in my head. The anger, the betrayal, the grief. They didn't just vanish, but they became manageable. I stopped waking up feeling like my life had ended. I started looking at the future, even if I wasn't sure what it held. Dating again? That felt impossible. Trusting someone? Even harder. But I wasn't ready to let Mari's mistakes define the rest of my life. I had been broken, yes, but I wasn't going to stay that way. Reddit had been a strange comfort throughout all this. Strangers offering support, advice, sometimes even just a reminder that I wasn't alone. It helped more than I ever expected. And as I sat there, scrolling through old messages, one thought kept circling in my mind. I had survived, barely, messily, but I had. And maybe, just maybe, that meant I could rebuild, not the life I had before, but something new, something better. So where do I go from here? I don't know yet, but for the first time in a long time, that question doesn't terrify me. Because no matter what comes next, I'm still here. And I'm finally ready to move forward.
Keep watching our stories by clicking on one of the videos that appear on the screen, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to be alerted about new videos. See you next time.